The Ottoman Empire. Now, we've spent a lot of time so far this semester discussing the nations and empires of Europe. We've talked about France, Spain, Portugal, and Great Britain. Now, we will begin our journey east as we look at the Ottoman Empire. So, one of the first things to note about the Ottoman Empire is religion. Now, Islam is the state religion of the Ottoman Empire. That makes it very different than many of the empires we've already discussed, which were Christian empires, notably France, Spain, and Portugal, who were Catholic, and Great Britain, which was Anglican Protestant. Now, one of the major things that makes this interesting is that while the official state religion of the Ottoman Empire is Islam, other religions were tolerated. Jews and Christians were classified as what many Muslim kingdoms would call in the past people of the book. And what this means is that even though they were not Muslims, they still were held to worship the same God whom the Muslims call Allah. This is the God that spoke to Abraham. And so as a result, the Jews, who are the descendants of Abraham through the line of Isaac, as opposed to Muhammad, who's a descendant of Abraham through the line of Ishmael, the Jews, and then later the Christians, who emerged out of Judaism, are seen as being related. They're sort of sister religions. They're not Islam, but they're close enough because they at least worship the same God. So that puts them in a different category than those who are regarded as pagans who worship other gods. Now, because of that, they are allowed to practice their religion. So Christians and Jews could practice their religions in peace within the Ottoman Empire. However, there were some interesting limitations that were put on Christians and Jews living in the Ottoman Empire. So one major rule was that they were taxed. There was higher taxation rates and additional taxes that Jews and Christians were required to pay that Muslim citizens of the Ottoman Empire did not have to pay. Additionally, because they were not the official state religion, they were forbidden from proselytizing, meaning they could not make an effort to convert other people. So if you were a Christian living in the Ottoman Empire, you could not go out and try to convert other people to Christianity. You were allowed to practice it yourself, but you were not supposed to try to convert other people to your religion. Whereas Islam, as the primary religion, the official religion of Ottoman Turkey, they could in fact go out and proselytize. So, the Janissaries. Now, the Janissaries are kind of the closest thing Ottoman Turkey ever gets to a standing army. And what the Janissaries were is they were elite soldiers who were loyal only to the Ottoman Sultan. They were Christian boys who were taken from their parents as youths. So these young boys were taken by the officials, and they were brought to special schools and training grounds, and they were converted to Islam. And then they were trained as elite soldiers and civil officials. And they were kind of the vanguard of the Sultan's army. While there were other elements of the Ottoman army, those other elements were often more loyal to local nobles and local tribal leaders, whereas the Janissaries were strictly loyal to the Sultan and the Sultan alone. And that's very important because they often formed the first line of defense in battles. Janissaries were vital in many of the battles that the Ottomans would win against the Austrians and the Hungarians during their European campaigns. So, international trade. Now, the Ottoman Empire controlled the western end of the Silk Road. You remember the Silk Road, the massive series of overland trading routes that connected China and India to the west. Now, because they controlled the eastern bank of the Mediterranean, which is where the end of the Silk Road is, Europe's access to the luxury goods of East Asia, such as porcelain, silk, spices, calico, etc., these things were limited by the Ottoman Turks. And the Ottomans had strict control over this. So they controlled the prices, how much of the goods were sold, things like that. And this made Ottoman Turkey fabulously wealthy. The Ottoman Empire grew incredibly wealthy doing this. They also made many important military and trading alliances with the Italian city-states, such as Genoa and Venice, as they traded with these cities, Florence, as they traded with these city-states, giving them access to the luxury goods of East Asia. Now, unfortunately for the Ottomans, all good things must come to an end, and the Ottoman dominion over Eastern trade was no different. So when Vasco da Gama made his voyage to India, it opened up direct trading between Europe and East Asia. That's very important, as goods are cheaper when they're bought at the source. This is a general rule for everything. If you buy goods at the source, they are always cheaper than if you try to buy them through multiple middlemen. And so by doing so, Portuguese and others who started trading with India got these goods much cheaper than buying them through the Ottoman and the Italians. And as a result, this meant that the Ottoman Empire lost a great deal of influence over European trade. It also meant the demise of the Ottoman-Italian alliances, which had begun to flourish in the late Middle Ages and the end of the Renaissance. In fact, according to some historians, there is a great deal of suspicion that one of the reasons why the Fourth Crusade ended up hitting Constantinople instead of Fatimid Egypt is actually because there was supposedly a treaty between the Doge of Venice and the Sultan of Egypt, in which the Doge agreed to make sure the Crusaders never hit the Sultanate down in Egypt, and directed them towards the Byzantines. So those were very important alliances for the Muslim world, as it kind of kept a more peaceable relation between them and the Christian West, and that those relationships began to break down as the West no longer required the Ottoman Turks as the gateway to these Eastern luxury goods. So the Sultan. Now the Sultan is the monarch who ruled over the Ottoman Empire, and the word Sultan is derived from the Arabic word which means either power or authority. Now, the Sultans of Ottoman Turkey were all members of the House Osman. In fact, it was a continuous male line that was not broken until the end of the Ottoman Empire, at the end of the First World War. Now, all sultans were absolute monarchs, for the most part. There was no official constitutional government until much later, almost until the end of the empire, that would limit the sultan's power. Now, sultans did not have a coat of arms, but they had a seal, a special signature called a tugra. And this is an example of this in a lab. This is all in Arabic calligraphy. So the Ottoman government. Many sultans were dominated by the Grand Viziers. Now the Grand Vizier is sort of the royal advisor. They're the highest civil official, and they are usually appointed by the Sultan. However, many times if sultans were unwilling or incapable of ruling, or simply never exerted themselves strong enough in politics, the Grand Vizier would, for more or less all practical purposes, become the de facto ruler of the empire. Now, then there was local government. And these local governments ruled over various subjects with a lot of ethnic and religious diversity. You had Muslims of different kinds, Sunni and Shiite Muslims, both living under Ottoman rule. You also had Christians of various sorts, Nestorian Christians, Eastern Orthodox Christians, various Catholic Christians, the Coptic Egyptian Church, the Assyrian Church of the East, it goes on and on, then various types of Jews, all living under one dominion. That doesn't even get into linguistic differences between the Turkic peoples and Arabic peoples and Syrian people, and the list goes on and on. So because of this diversity, a large amount of power was actually given to local governments in order to try and appease the local populations, these diverse local populations who were all subject to the rule of the Ottoman Sultan. And the empire was divided up into provinces called islets, or eyalet. The eyalets were ruled over by a governor called a pasha. So we get a pasha of three tails, which was, this referred to three feather-like protrusions on the end of the governor's staff. And the pasha was sort of a governor, and he held near absolute power in his own eyalet. And each of these pashas was appointed by the Grand Vizier. So they were the governors who ruled over these various regions. Now, there were several accommodations which were made to the West. One is that French merchants were granted extraterritoriality. And what extraterritoriality means is a legal principle which dictates that foreigners can be tried in separate courts and judged according to the laws of their home country. So what this meant was that French merchants who were trading with the Ottoman Empire would not, if they were accused of a crime, they would not be tried in an Ottoman court according to the local laws of whichever islet they were in. Rather, they would be taken to a French extraterritorial court and would be tried according to French law. And I believe that is the extent of the slides here. So that gives you a nice peek at the Ottoman Empire and what it is they were up to. In our future lessons, we will then be moving farther east and looking at the Mughal Empire.